Hello, Wonderhussy here, in the beautiful town of Butte, Montana. This is a really cool, historic old mining town that's also one of the biggest Superfund sites in the entire USA. Okay, if you don't know what a Superfund site is, it's basically a place in the United States that's become so thoroughly contaminated with toxic chemicals that it's going to take some kind of prolonged, long-term cleanup effort to make it safe for people to live in again. Well, unfortunately, this super cool, historic old town in this beautiful valley high in the northern Rocky Mountains is one of those places. Okay, it all started back in the late 1800s when immigrants from all around the world came here to work in the copper mines. Okay, I guess Butte was originally started as a gold and silver mining camp, and all this pesky copper was just getting in the way of all the good stuff until the early 1900s with the twin inventions of the telephone and electricity. Now all of a sudden, everybody needed lots of copper wiring, and Butte just happened to have one of the biggest copper deposits in the entire world. So, starting in the early 1900s, Butte became one of the biggest copper producers in the entire world, at one time producing something like a third of the world's copper. And in the early days, the men would go deep underground and hack out the copper the old-fashioned way. You can see here at the old Mountain Con mine, that's short for Mountain Consolidated Mine, this town has really embraced its mining history. There's giant old head frames like this all over town, and in fact, this head frame here is 129.5 feet tall, and it's not even the tallest remaining head frame left standing. I mean, just looking out over the city on this beautiful July day, you can see there's several other head frames right in the middle of town. I mean, you can see here written on the side of the Mountain Con head frame, I guess we are a mile high above ground here. We're like a mile above sea level. And these miners would go a mile deep underground. Or according to the sign here, 5,300 feet underground. So yeah, back in the early 1900s, Butte was a bona fide boom town. I think it was considered the industrial center of the United States between Chicago and San Francisco, and it was the biggest city in Montana. There was something like 25,000 people living here back in the early 1900s, and they had hotels, and they had saloons, and they had brothels, and they even had an amusement park. Because like I said, people from all over the world were coming here to work in these copper mines. But in 1917, at the very height of the boom, there was a terrible accident. The deadliest hard rock mining accident in U.S. history. The Granite Mountain Speculator Fire on June 8th, 1917. So they have this really cool monument they set up to pay tribute to the men who lost their lives in this particular accident and other accidents, but I guess, you know, this one was pretty bad. There was some kind of fire down in the shaft, and 168 miners died. You know, I guess they suffocated from carbon monoxide poisoning, being trapped down there. Maybe some of them were buried alive. I don't know all the details, but I do think this is really cool. They actually have a list here with the names of every single miner who died in that terrible accident. And looking at the list, you can see from just looking at the guys' last names, you know, Allen, Anderson, Bojovic, Bados, Bjornstrom, Vari, Zelros, Yukonovic. I mean, these miners really did come from all over the world. In fact, you can see they have different flags up showing all the different countries, all the different nationalities that came all the way out here to Montana to work in these copper mines. And in fact, to this day, there are more people of Irish descent per capita living in Butte than in any other city in the United States. That's right, there's more people of Irish descent per capita here in Butte than even Boston or Chicago. And because of that, they do have a pretty big St. Patrick's Day party here, and they're getting ready to have some other kind of Irish festival too. That might also be why there's no open container laws here in Butte. That's right, just like Vegas or New Orleans, you can walk around the city openly drinking a beer, which I did last night. Anyway, disaster or no disaster, the world still needed copper, so the mining continued, although in the 1950s they quit mining underground and started open pit mining. Okay, open pit mining, where they just dig a giant hole in the ground and scoop out all the sweet, sweet gold or silver or whatever it is, and then dump the fill all over the place. I mean, you can see there's giant tailings piles all over the place here in Butte. Well, I guess this style of mining is safer and, more importantly, more cost-effective. So starting in the 1950s, that's what they started doing. And over the years, I guess they just kept digging and digging, and this pit got bigger and bigger, and eventually it started swallowing up the little neighborhoods around the pit. I mean, all these different ethnic groups that moved here, you know, there was like a little Chinatown, and there was a little Italy, and there was like a Serbian neighborhood. Well, a lot of those neighborhoods ended up literally getting swallowed up by this pit. Even the amusement park had to go when it was in the way. I mean, this thing was really like the monster that ate Butte. But in the 1970s, the Anaconda Mining Company, which is the company that basically owned this whole area, well, I guess they weren't making as much money as they once were, and so they decided to sell out. And they sold to Arco. Okay, Arco, the gas company. I guess Arco wanted to get into the mining business, so they bought the Anaconda Mining Company, and they did operate these mines for a few years. But by the early 1980s, I guess the price of metals had fallen so sharply that it wasn't profitable for Arco anymore either. And so after only owning this thing for about 5 years, on Earth Day, ironically enough, Earth Day 1982, Arco ceased all operations of these mines. But as you can probably imagine, after 100 years of continuous copper mining, there's still a few lingering side effects. Okay, so being officially named a Superfund site isn't necessarily a designation most towns would want. But here in Butte, they do embrace their mining history, and they know how to put the fun in Superfund. They turned their biggest liability into a tourist attraction. This is the Berkeley Pit, that giant former open pit mine I was talking about earlier. Well, when Anaconda shut the mines down, I guess they also quit pumping out the old underground mine tunnels below the water table. So now all this contaminated groundwater started seeping up and filling the pit with creepy, toxic blue water. I mean, you really can't believe it until you see it for yourself. And they charge $5 to get in here and look at it. And I'm cheap, so believe me, I drove and hiked all over the place trying to find a free place to look in. But you can't. Gotta pay the $5. So let's go in. Oh my gosh, look at this creepy tunnel we have to walk through to get to the end of the platform overlooking this poisonous lake. I don't know if you're as excited as I am, but I'm pretty excited. Although, disclaimer, I did this once before. I've been to Butte back in 2016 with my sister. And back then, well, I was pretty broke. And back then they only charged $3. And even then my sister and I, but we decided to do it because how can you not? Hopefully they're not upset with me for showing this for free on YouTube, but listen, you really have to see this for yourself in person if you ever happen to be in Butte. Wow, I guess the water in this pit is so acidic it has the same pH as like Coca-Cola or gastric acid. And so anything that touches it gets pretty badly burned, especially if you try to drink it, which is, I guess, what happens with birds, okay? That's why you keep hearing these weird police siren sounds. Well, they play that to keep birds from landing on this water. Because I guess back in 2016, a bunch of Canadian snow geese landed here as they were migrating. They needed a place to rest, and they all died. And when they autopsied them, I guess they found all kinds of burns in their esophaguses from drinking the water. Man, it's too bad I can't get closer to this dang Berkeley pit, because you know I would surely like to get at least a little bit closer. I mean, I want to see that. I don't know if you could see in the footage I shot, there was a little tiny kind of like house with a pier, at the bottom, like a little cabin, and I think that's where this bird guy has his office. Okay, all those woo woo woo, woo weird sounds that they were playing sound like space guns. Well, that's to keep birds off, and I guess they fire propane cannons and they fire AR-15s at them. I mean, they try not to kill the birds, as far as I know. They just shoot the water ahead of them to like scare them off so they fly away and don't get their poor little feet burned up. Another classic example of man, what hath he wrought? And with what hath he wrought it? I mean, look at these giant friggin' earth-moving machines. And again, you'll have to excuse the fact that there's a fence between me and this giant bulldozer or whatever it is. I mean, I guess this ginormous contraption is what they use to dig this huge hole in the first place. Pretty impressive. Almost as impressive as the fact that they get people to pay $5 a piece, $3 for kids, all day long. I'm not kidding. I've probably been here at least a half hour, 45 minutes, and it's been a constant stream of tourists coming in and plunking down their hard-earned cash to stare at a giant puddle of toxic water. Ain't that America? Something to see, yeah! Toxic mind ponds for you and me. All joking aside though, you do have to be impressed by the scale of this operation. I mean, look at the size of this freaking bucket. And can you imagine sitting in the cockpit controlling this thing? Woo-wee! That would actually be, well, I was gonna say a ton of fun, but it'd be more like 10 tons of fun. Or how about this dump truck? I mean, I'm guessing whoever drove this thing just took load after load after load of toxic tailings and piled them up all around the edges of the pit, making the pit appear even deeper than it really is. So I don't think there's really much concern of this pit ever overflowing its banks, which I guess is a valid concern considering it's basically as acidic as gastric acid. I wouldn't want that flowing through the streets of town either. But apparently all these tailings that have been piled up around the edge are keeping it nice and safe from the good citizens of Butte, or vice versa. Oh, look, a water fountain. Oh, it's such a hot day. I would absolutely love a refreshing sip of toxic Butte Superfund water. Actually, I was reading up on it, and apparently the city of Butte has like super advanced water filtration system with like ceramic particulate filters. So I feel pretty comfortable in drinking the water. I mean, say what you will about the EPA and the federal government, but at least they did step in through this Superfund program and help out, I guess, because Butte looks like it's really coming back. I mean, it looks like they really are trying to restore the ecosystem. And there's all these cool little walking and biking trails. And just look at how beautiful and how non-creepy blue this little creek is. I love it. To me, Butte is like one of those tough, scrappy little western towns that refuses to die. Like I said, I have been here before, and that was back in 2016, okay, so about 7 years ago. And it is completely changed since then. I'm serious. When my sister and I were here in 2016, we walked around here, and it seemed like most of these buildings were either abandoned or vacant, and it had a really creepy kind of Detroit Rust Belt ghost town vibe. But now it looks like there's some kind of gentrification going on. I mean, look at all these amazing old brick buildings. I bet real estate is super cheap here, so it's no wonder a bunch of artists and hipsters moved in and started fixing the place up. You know, this place has a ton of potential. But what I really like about Butte is their sense of humor. I mean, they really embrace their toxic legacy. Like I said, they know how to put the fun in Superfund. Anyway, speaking of the Superfund designation, I do think it's kind of ironic that ARCO got stuck footing the bill for all that cleanup. I guess that's how the Superfund program works. The federal government steps in and makes sure that whoever created the mess in the first place has to be the one to pay for its cleanup. Well, if you think about it, Arco only owned those mines for like 5 years, but they got stuck footing the bill to clean up over 100 years of toxic mess created by the Anaconda Mining Company. Now, I know the Anaconda Mining Company's not in business anymore, so it's not like the government could stick them with the bill, but I'll bet you anything, the fat cats who ran that company still have descendants to this day living high on the hog off of that mining money, and it just seems a little bit unfair to me that Arco gets stuck paying for the cleanup. Okay, anyway, you might be wondering what I'm doing at the cemetery here in Butte. Well, it's because I came here to pay my respects at a very important grave. And no, it's not the grave of, I think his name was Frank Little. He was a labor organizer who came to Butte back in the late 1800s when the mines were first getting fired up, and he tried to unionize the miners, and he ended up getting murdered for his trouble. These Anaconda mine bosses did not play around. I think they tied him to a car and dragged him until his neck broke, and it sounded terrible. And they weren't shy about killing striking workers either, okay? I guess there was some mine strike once, and gosh, I think they just fired directly into the line of strikers and shot them in the backs. So yeah, I really probably should go visit this Frank Little's grave, but I don't know where it is. So I'm just gonna check out this other grave that's a lot better marked, which happens to be the final resting place of probably Butte's most famous son, Evel Knievel. Okay, did you know Evel Knievel was born right here in Butte, Montana? Matter of fact, he wasn't born Evel Knievel, he was born Robert Knievel. But I think it was here in the Butte jail. He got thrown in jail for being drunk and rowdy or something. And while he was in jail, I guess there was this other guy, kind of like the town drunk, whose last name was Knoffel, and his nickname was Awful Knoffel. So the jailer decided to call Robert Evel Knievel. And I think I heard that he purposely misspelled it because he didn't want people to think he was actually evil. But anyway, this is where he's buried. And what's interesting about this tombstone, if you read it, well, it's got a carving of the sky cycle. Okay, that's the thing he tried to jump the Snake River Canyon in instead of a regular motorcycle because it was such a big canyon. He had to have this specially developed sky cycle. If you watch the video I made about that just a few weeks ago, well, then you'll know what I'm talking about. Anyway, after the sky cycle and his name, it says, a mile-long leap of the Snake River Canyon from this point on September 8th, 1974, employing a unique sky cycle. A man can fall many times in life, but he's never a failure if he tries to get up. That's a great quote, and it's very Evel Knievel. But isn't that funny? I think they made this gravestone when he jumped the Snake River Canyon because a lot of people didn't expect him to survive, including him, I think. They said he had a real sense of foreboding the morning of that jump, and he thought he was going to die that day. So they already had the gravestone made up and ready. Well, obviously he didn't die during that jump. I think he only suffered a broken nose. He lived many more years, but I guess he hung on to this tombstone all that time because he figured he'd be able to use it eventually, which he did. So I guess they just carved the backside with his true date of death, which was November 30th, 2007. You guys remember where you were on November 30th, 2007? I feel like I do remember hearing about Evel Knievel dying. I wasn't a huge Evel Knievel fan growing up, even though we certainly share the same aesthetics. But I do remember hearing about him dying. I feel like he was living in a motel or something. He was on drugs. And, well, if you know anything about Evel Knievel's personal life, he wasn't a very good person. I mean, I know I probably shouldn't be squatting on somebody's grave saying they weren't a good person, but by all accounts, he wasn't a very nice guy. But it's funny because, you know, he was all about don't do drugs, stay in school, and then he's got this religious quote, faith, health, education, love, work, honor, ability, and dream. Believe in Jesus Christ. Amen. I don't think those are words that he actually lived by, unfortunately. But anyway, I thought while I'm in Butte, I might as well stop here because of my own personal interest in quirky grave sites like this. Like, look, somebody came and put, well, it's a cop in a cop car. I don't know why you would put that on Evel Knievel's grave, but then, you know, red, white, and blue flowers, American flags, stars, bunting. And then look over here next to him. There's his son, Robert Knievel Jr., Captain Robbie Knievel. Lucky landings. Oh, wow. And then there's this really cool, like, etching of somebody jumping the Snake River Canyon. And, well, obviously it's not Evel Knievel because he did it with a sky cycle. As far as I know, maybe his son tried to do it too. I know a daredevil eventually did jump the Snake River Canyon, but I don't think it was until 2016, and it wasn't his son. Which, here's a picture of his son. Gosh, nice looking guy. Also apparently a very religious guy. Gosh, he must have been relatively young when he died. Yeah, look, born in 62, died. Oh, he just died in January? Oh my gosh, so how old was he? 38, like 61 years old. Wow, I wonder what happened. Maybe a not so lucky landing. Anyway, check this out too. Next to him, there's even more Knievels. It's like the whole Knievel family is buried here. This must be like great-grandpappy Ignatius J. Knievel, who lived from 1891 to 1972. And Mammy, that would be grandma, I guess, Emma F. Brown, also had a nice long life. Wow, look at her. She almost lived to be 100. But then look down here. Then there's oh gosh, I wonder what this is. Nicholas John Knievel. Must be another family member. And Emma Knievel. Well, hold on a minute. Isn't that just her? What do I know? Anyway, I thought I would stop here and pay my respects at the entire Knievel family's gravesite, because to me, Evel Knievel is the perfect anti-hero for the scrappy town of Butte. The town that refuses to die. The town that makes fun of its toxic legacy. The town that charges you $5 and gets it to go look into a pit full of toxic water. The kind of town that produces a guy who has a tombstone made up 30 years before his death and then just flips it around and uses the backside. That's what I love about Butte. And that's why I came to salute Evel Knievel. Because if anyone was ever a survivor, it'd be the guy who held the Guinness World Record for the highest number of broken bones in a lifetime. He was a survivor, but he was just one in a city of survivors. Because that's what Butte is. A Superfund survivor.